call to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much to me.
Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama have endorsed Kamala Harris for president. It's one of the final steps in Harris's consolidation of support among major players in the Democratic Party. The Hill national political reporter Cate Martel joins us to discuss. Kate, when Democrats were debating what to do about Biden, there were arguments that making a change would divide the party, but it seems, at least for now, that Democrats are pretty united.
That was a big question, Drew, and now it's funny that that seems so far in the distant past. Even though a week ago, Democrats were fairly in disarray. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion over whether President Biden should step down. And just a few days later, we have a new likely top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris. And Democrats have raised a record number of fundraising numbers. Within the first 24 hours, she raised an astonishing $81 million. And now that figure is over $100 million. You know, Democrats really seem to be enjoying this excitement. This is not a feeling that they've had much during this cycle because of the issues with President Biden's age and the lack of excitement and enthusiasm among Democrats and worries about down ballot races. So Democrats do seem to be fairly united. Technically, Harris is only the likely nominee. She hasn't, formally gotten the nomination. That won't happen for a few weeks. But as of now, it's sure looking like that. And by getting the endorsement from the Obamas and a lot of major Democrats and celebrities, it really does seem like Democrats are in an entirely different position than they were a week ago now.
And we continue to see polling that shows a tightening race between Harris and Trump. Harris seems to be taking Democratic-leaning states like New Hampshire and Maine back off the map, and she's pulled even with Trump in the crucial battleground of Michigan. Has the race changed in a fundamental way, or are these just fleeting good vibes from the newness of the Harris campaign?
So, Drew, I'd say the newness definitely is a factor. There's this expected bump and bounce because of, the excitement of having a new top of the ticket. But I would say this race has changed in a fundamental way because it's opened up a lot of battleground purple states, such as New Hampshire. I find New Hampshire, where I'm from, a pretty interesting example because if you remember back into the primary cycle that, Nikki Haley did really well among independents and some moderate-leaning Republican voters, while Trump did well with his base and hardcore Republicans. That tells me that there were, a big room for Kamala Harris to come in and potentially pick off some of these moderate independent voters that weren't thrilled with Trump's policies and style of politics. And, we're starting to see some of this polling come out that some of those voters may start to go towards Harris. She's not necessarily a more progressive-leaning part of the Democratic Party where she has the ability, depending on her VP pick, to pick off more of these independents. And, with some new polling, including new polling this week from Emerson and The Hill, it's showing that there's a really, really tight race in 6 battleground states, including in Wisconsin, where we're seeing actually a tie between Harris and Trump. Yes, this is early and there'll still be a lot of issues that will shake out in the campaign, but it's fascinating so far to see that it has opened up some of these races. And I think that we're going to look at a fundamentally new race, not just this necessarily a blip that we're seeing in the first week of Harris's campaign.
Throwing a little cold water on all these Democratic celebrations, Democratic strategist James Carville is advising Democrats to slow their roll, warning that Republican attacks are coming in a big way. What's Carville's message to Dems?
Yeah, it is a very fair point, Drew, that, Democrats are elated and have a lot of newfound enthusiasm. But as James Carville was, alluding to, that you shouldn't get too giddy over this new development because that blip won't hold, that the campaign is going to need to find and coalesce a strategy around certain issues when it comes to policy and trying to find new blocks of voters to add to their coalition, that they can't just let this new announcement ride them to November because that's not going to happen. And, there's a very famous saying that campaign strategists on both sides of the aisle say that, the worst thing that you can do as a campaign is think that you're going to win. And, you get complacent and you get overconfident, and that's when mistakes are made, and you don't necessarily look for those additional voting blocks. So I think that Carville's message to Democrats is to stay on your toes, don't get comfortable with the past few days, and try to find, a deeper strategy that will lead them to November, not just riding this wave.
Over on the other side, some House Republicans are voicing concern over the pick of J.D. Vance as Trump's running mate on the presidential ticket. In a series of anonymous interviews, the elected officials complain about his lack of experience, isolationist foreign policy, and inability to expand the Republican coalition. Is this just normal political hand-wringing, or are there deep concerns in the Republican Party over the pick?
I would argue, Drew, that there actually are deep concerns among House Republicans and Republicans more broadly. The Hill's Michael Schnell really got some good reporting from House Republicans that seem really concerned with J.D. Vance as a pick. Because, hey, let's step back from this. J.D. Vance was chosen when President Biden was on top of the ticket, and former President Trump was likely cruising to November and was in a pretty good spot politically. He didn't necessarily choose J.D. Vance for the electability factor. He thought that was kind of locked down and chose J.D. Vance as the next generation of MAGA and this populist figure in the Senate that he thought could be helpful to him in an administration. That being said, now the race, as we've said many times, has drastically changed, and now a lot of House Republicans do have some concerns. I should mention, not every House Republican. He still does have the support, for example, from the House Freedom Caucus and certain segments of the Republican Party. But some of these concerns seem to come from some veteran lawmakers, some more Reagan-esque Republicans, and some more moderate Republicans. These are Republicans who are concerned more about foreign policy and are more hawkish on foreign policy. And they're looking at J.D. Vance's stances on Ukraine, for example, and seeing him as more of this populist figure that they have some concerns about, that it's more of this new vision for the Republican Party than this traditional Republican that we've known for the past few decades. And there is some concerns from these Republicans, Drew.
Whether or not Trump was actually struck by a bullet during the July 13th assassination attempt is still an open question, at least according to the FBI. Trump says he was definitely hit by a bullet. Others suggest it could be a piece of glass from a teleprompter that was hit. What is the FBI saying, and what's Trump's response?
The FBI director actually testified this week, Christopher Wray testified this week on Capitol Hill, and he basically said, it's an open investigation, and he couldn't say without a doubt that he was actually struck by a bullet as opposed to shrapnel, for example, the glass that you mentioned. So, as far as he's concerned, where the FBI is conducting its investigation, it makes sense that in testifying he would say that there's no actual discussion on this, yes, that has been finalized. That being said, the analyses that the New York Times had was showing that everything suggests that it was hit by a bullet, and former President Trump was not happy by what the FBI director testified on Capitol Hill this week. He had a pretty lengthy Truth Social post where he laid into Christopher Wray and said that he was absolutely hit by a bullet, and, attacked Christopher Wray politically because, this is something that I think was very traumatizing to former President Trump in this assassination attempt. And I think that by people suggesting that it may have just been shrapnel this so early in the game when there is no answer, I think that really hurt Trump on this deep level where, it got under his skin. And that's why we saw him take to his social media account and Truth Social and really go into Christopher Wray and lay into him.
After the change at the top of the Democratic ticket, Republicans are now directing their fire at Kamala Harris. The pro-Trump super PAC MAGA Inc. is planning to spend $12 million per week through Labor Day to define Harris to swing state voters. And Harris is going to be crisscrossing the country campaigning. Democrats are planning their own ad blitz. The race to answer who is Kamala Harris seems to be on.
Absolutely. And because we have about 100 days until the election, it sure has opened up, how will she be defined? Usually you have a primary cycle where you get to know these candidates and you get to know their platforms, and also you see their political competitors go after them and have their certain issue areas that they want to attack. Now, because we only have several months for this to happen, there are several questions that are outstanding. Republicans are probably going to hit back on her based on working in the Biden administration. She's been President Biden's deputy, and there are lingering questions about the economy and about the border that Republicans are likely going to try to lean in on in criticizing her on the campaign trail. That being said, we're seeing Democrats on the other side trying to paint her as, a historic figure. She would be the first Black woman and the first woman to be president of the United States if she does win. And that's something they're going to heavily lean into. We've also seen this massive social media movement in favor of Harris. I'm curious to see personally how that's going to stick. I've seen TikTok after TikTok going viral about her, leaning into certain Gen Z memes and certain songs. And, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how much does that land and become part of her campaign versus tying her to the Biden administration. So it's going to be this race between Republicans trying to paint her as Biden 2.0 and Democrats trying to paint her as this historic, exciting, younger figure. And as we've seen, the Trump campaign tried to paint President Biden as an older figure that isn't somebody that's right for the presidency. Now, just a week later, we've seen the scripts flipped, and now former President Trump is the older of the two candidates, and that's something I fully expect to see Republicans try to back off on and Democrats lean into.
Now, Harris is accusing Trump of backpedaling after his campaign said he would not commit to debating her until after the Democratic National Convention. Trump and Biden had been scheduled to debate on September 10th, but it's not clear if that will now happen with Harris at the top of the ticket. What's the latest on the debate front?
Yeah, like you said, former President Trump has now backed off from committing to debate Harris. And, part of his argument in not wanting to debate Harris so far is seeing, let's let Democrats finalize their pick and to try to take away the certainty of what Harris will likely be the nominee, and by saying, let's let Democrats sort this out to try to buy time for the Trump campaign. And now I will say, when you look back to the 2020 campaign, Trump does privately acknowledge, according to reporting, that the first presidential debate was probably what cost him the election. He came out really strong and he interrupted Biden too much. So I think that Trump does realize how important these debates are and is trying not to commit too soon. Committing to 2 debates against President Biden, who's 81 years old, was an entirely different ballgame to committing to debates with Vice President Harris, who's 59 years old, and he hasn't debated before. So, as of now, the Trump campaign is not saying that they will necessarily debate Harris, but because of the pressure and because of the arguments that Democrats that can make of, hey, you won't come out and debate Harris, he's scared of her, that can be an effective campaign line. So while Trump is saying this now, I don't think we've heard the last of this, and very well in the fall, there very well could be a debate between former President Trump and Vice President Harris.
All right, that's all I got. Cate Martel, thanks for joining us. Before I let you go, though, I understand you have a new politics quiz. Tell me about that and hit me with your question.
Hey, we do. So for The Hill, we now have a weekly politics quiz that's coming out on Friday to test how much of a news junkie you are. So Drew, if you're down for it, I figured I could throw a question at you.
Hit me.
Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, made a quip during a campaign event this week about how Democrats say it's racist to do anything. Which product did he use as his example? Doritos Nacho Cheese, Diet Mountain Dew, Pringles, Dr. Pepper, or Three Musketeers?
Diet Mountain Dew.
Easy. You're a news junkie, Drew.
Yeah.
Not everyone's getting that right. I can see the analytics, and some of these are tripping people up.
All right. Well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I definitely do remember that. And I also enjoy an occasional Diet Mountain Dew, so I don't know what that says about me.
Well, I wrote these questions, and I approve of all of these answers that I gave. Also a big Doritos and Diet Dr. Pepper fan, so I can't say something to this, but it's funny how, a small moment like this on the campaign trail has now really broken through the news cycle, and I keep seeing tweet after tweet about Diet Mountain Dew based on J.D. Vance's small quip.
Hey, it's not a bad drink. Cate Martel, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
A New York Democrat has introduced a constitutional amendment to reverse the Supreme Court immunity ruling on former President Trump. Representative Joseph Morell filed the amendment Wednesday, seeking to undo the High Court's decision that grants Trump a presumption of criminal immunity for official acts. The court handed down the ruling earlier this month, split along ideological lines in a 6-3 decision. The decision was seen as a win for former President Trump, who is challenging the basis of his federal election subversion case in D.C. Amending the Constitution is a heavy lift, as the change requires 2/3 approval of the House and Senate and 3/4 approval of state legislatures or state ratifying conventions. A watchdog is reporting that former Attorney General Bill Barr broke from Department of Justice guidelines by disclosing non-public details of the 2020 election. That's according to the Inspector General's office, which criticized Barr for disclosing details of an investigation into mail-in ballots discovered in a dumpster in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. According to the Inspector General, Barr disclosed details of the investigation to former President Trump, who later publicized them on a national radio show. The Inspector General said Barr's actions could have harmed an ongoing investigation, but were not violations of the law. Inflation ticked up slightly in June, according to new numbers from the Commerce Department. The numbers show the price index that tracks cost of living for households rose 0.1% last month and 2.5% over the past year. Inflation peaked at a 40-year high in mid-2022 and has eased since. Recent inflation data has shown mixed results. President Biden touted the new report as a sign that his administration is making real progress in fighting inflation. The news comes as the Fed is set to meet next week to discuss interest rates.
On Thursday, the Justice Department took into custody in El Paso 2 more alleged leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world.
The son of infamous cartel leader El Chapo and another Mexican drug kingpin have been arrested in Texas. El Chapo's son Joaquin Guzman Lopez and kingpin Zambada Garcia turned themselves into authorities upon arrival in El Paso, Texas. Garcia, nicknamed El Mayo, is the co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. El Mayo was lured onto a U.S.-bound private plane by Guzman Lopez to look for some real estate. Both men face multiple charges in the U.S. for leading the cartel's criminal operations, including fentanyl manufacturing and distribution. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.